I'm Paisley, and this is how my world unraveled in the dead of night, only to be rebuilt by my own hands. Picture this: a Chicago apartment, moonlight slicing through the blinds, and a whisper not meant for my ears. My husband, Dean, thought he could outsmart me, plotting to strip me of everything: my money, my home, my dignity, while I slept beside him. He was wrong. I'm 32, and I've learned that betrayal doesn't just break you, it sharpens you. Within a week, his carefully laid plans crumbled, and I was the one standing taller. But the real twist? It wasn't just the lies he told. It was how long he'd been weaving them, how deep his deception ran, and how far he'd go to destroy me. The first crack in my reality came on a Tuesday, just past midnight. I woke to an empty bed, the sheets beside me cold as Lake Michigan in January. Dean was gone, and the silence of our apartment felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I rubbed sleep from my eyes, my bare feet brushing the hardwood as I sat up. Then I heard it, a low, careful murmur from the hallway. My stomach twisted. Dean's voice, smooth as ever, but hushed, like he was guarding a secret. "She doesn't suspect anything yet," he said, each word a shard of glass in my chest. My breath hitched, and I froze, straining to hear more. Who was he talking to? The words that followed were muffled, his tone dropping to a whisper. But the damage was done. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of dread. This wasn't a work call. Dean never whispered to clients. He didn't care if I overheard his late-night deal-making. My fingers curled into fists, nails biting my palms. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I barely made it back to bed before his footsteps echoed closer. Slipping under the covers, I forced my breathing to steady, feigning sleep as the mattress dipped under his weight. He exhaled, relaxed, like he'd just dodged a bullet. My heart pounded so loud I swore he'd hear it. Minutes ticked by, and I turned, blinking up at him, my voice soft, groggy. "Where were you?" He didn't flinch. "Bathroom," he muttered, quick and casual. A lie. "And the phone call?" I pressed, watching his face. "Just a client," he said, meeting my gaze, unreadable as stone. "Had to smooth out some details." I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing myself to roll over, but my mind screamed. That whisper, "She doesn't suspect anything yet," clawed at me. Was I paranoid, or was Dean hiding something big? I told myself to sleep, to ignore it, but the doubt had taken root, and it wasn't letting go. Morning came, gray and heavy, the Chicago skyline looming beyond our window. Dean was still asleep, his arm draped across my pillow, his face calm, like a man with no secrets. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and padded barefoot to the kitchen, the tiles cool against my skin. Something felt off, a nagging pull I couldn't shake. Dean handled most of our finances, mortgage, utilities, groceries, and I'd never questioned it. We had a joint account for bills, but our savings were separate, always had been. Still, I opened our banking app, scrolling through transactions, my stomach tightened. $500, $200, $750, $2,000. A dozen withdrawals over 3 months, small but frequent, like drops eroding a stone. These weren't for bills, not for investments, not for anything we'd discussed. My hands gripped the phone, knuckles white. Behind me, footsteps. I locked the screen as Dean leaned against the doorway, rubbing his neck. "Morning," he mumbled, voice thick with sleep. "What's for breakfast?" I set my phone down, forcing a smile. "I was about to ask you the same thing." He smirked, pouring coffee. "Guess it's your turn then." I watched him sip, his free hand resting on the counter, casual as ever. "I checked our bank account this morning," I said, crossing my arms. His grip tightened on the mug just for a second, before he chuckled. "And?" I held his gaze. "There are a lot of small withdrawals, things I don't recognize." He barely hesitated. "Just small investments," he said, setting the cup down. "Business opportunities. Short-term gains, nothing to worry about." His eyes locked on mine, daring me to push. I didn't. Not yet. But I knew he was lying. The rest of the day, I tried to shake the unease, but Dean wasn't helping. His phone was glued to his hand, his screen always face down. Every call he took was in another room, his voice too low to catch. The wall between us grew thicker, and as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, one thought burned. Dean was planning something, and I was running out of time to find out what. The next morning, the Chicago air felt sharper, like it was slicing through the fog of my doubt. Dean sat across from me at breakfast, scrolling through his phone, his face a mask of calm. I sipped my coffee, watching him, wondering how I'd missed the shift in him, the way his smiles didn't reach his eyes, the way his words felt rehearsed. At 32, I'd trusted him to be my partner, my anchor, but now every glance felt like a chess move. My mind replayed that whispered call, those secret withdrawals, and I knew I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Dean wasn't just drifting, he was plotting, and I was the target. He looked up, catching my stare, and flashed a grin. "Hey babe, can we talk about something?" His tone was light, but my pulse quickened. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice even. He leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee like we were discussing weekend plans. "I was thinking we should get our financials in order," he said. "You know, just in case of emergencies." "Do you have a full list of your accounts? Passwords, assets, that kind of stuff?" My fingers tightened around my mug, the ceramic warm against my palms. Dean had never cared about my finances. Our joint account covered bills, but my savings, my condo, they were mine, always separate. "Our financials?" I echoed carefully. "Yeah," he said, nodding. "We should keep everything in one place. Makes things easier." I stared at him, my heartbeat drumming in my ears. His lips curved into a small smile, but his eyes flickered just for a second. This wasn't about us. This was about him, and he was testing me. I forced a neutral expression. I guess I could put something together." His smile widened, but it didn't feel warm. It felt like a trap closing. He nodded, changing the subject, but my mind was racing. Dean wasn't preparing for an emergency. He was preparing for an exit, and he wanted my money with him. That evening, he was uncharacteristically relaxed, laughing at the TV, scrolling through his phone like nothing was wrong. He even suggested ordering takeout, playing the doting husband to perfection, but it made my skin crawl. His ease, his charm, it was all too polished, too practiced. Then it happened. Dean got up to shower, leaving his phone on the coffee table. He never left it unattended. Ever. My pulse quickened as I stared at it, the screen face down, just like it had been for weeks. A notification lit up, a text from a name I didn't know, Ilya Morrow. My hands shook as I tilted the screen just enough to read the preview. "Just make sure she stays in the dark, almost there." My breath caught, my chest tightening so fast it hurt. The room shrank, the walls pressing in. Who was Ilya Morrow? What did "almost there" mean? My finger hovered over the screen, 1,000 wild thoughts flashing through my mind. Another woman? A business partner? A plan to ruin me? The shower shut off and panic surged. I placed the phone back exactly as it was, sinking into the couch, gripping my knees to stop the trembling. Dean strolled in, towel drying his hair, his face infuriatingly calm. "Decide on dinner?" he asked, ruffling his hair. I swallowed hard. Not yet. He grabbed his phone, unlocking it without a glance, like he had nothing to hide. But I knew better now. That night I lay beside him, his breathing steady, his face serene. But I gripped my phone under the covers, whispering into the dark. Who the hell is Ilya Morrow? The question haunted me, gnawing at every thought. By morning, I was a ghost in my routine, pouring coffee, brushing my teeth, all while Ilya's name echoed like a puzzle I couldn't solve. Dean sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, perfectly at ease. Then he looked up, his smile too smooth. "Hey babe, can you sign something real quick?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "Sign what?" I asked, keeping my voice light. He slid a document across the table, his tone casual. "Just some financial updates for tax purposes." But his fingers drummed unevenly on the table, a tell. I picked up the papers, my stomach knotting as I skimmed the legal jargon. It wasn't about taxes. The last page screamed the truth. A property transfer agreement. My assets, my savings, my condo, everything would be in his name. I forced myself to look up. Dean watched me, his smile careful. "What is this?" I asked, my voice too controlled. His smile didn't falter. "Just a precaution, babe. Legal convenience. Nothing changes between us." My hands trembled, not from fear, but rage. "Nothing changes. You're asking me to sign over everything." His jaw clenched, just for a fraction, before he laughed. "Paisley, don't be dramatic, it's just paperwork." I held his gaze. "Then why are you so eager for me to sign without reading it?" His expression hardened, his voice low, a warning. "You don't want to do this, Paisley." I met his stare, unflinching. "Is that a threat?" He leaned back, arms crossed, his smirk fading into something colder. "I just think you're making this harder than it needs to be." I smiled, just enough to make him shift uncomfortably. "You know what, Dean? You're right. I do need to think about this." I stood, gathering the papers, and walked to the kitchen, placing them neatly on the counter. I wasn't arguing, not yet, because now I was the one in control. That night, as Chicago's skyline glittered beyond my window, I made a decision. Dean thought he could corner me, but at 32, I wasn't the naive woman he married. His document, that sly attempt to claim my assets, sat on the kitchen counter like a taunt. I didn't sleep. Instead, I paced, the hardwood creaking under my feet, my mind racing. By dawn, I had a plan, not just to protect myself, but to outmaneuver him. The air felt electric, charged with the weight of my resolve. I wasn't going to wait for Dean to make his next move. I was done being his pawn. First, I called my financial advisor, a woman I trusted from my old firm. Over coffee in a Loop cafe, the city's pulse humming outside, I laid out everything. Dean's lies, the withdrawals, Ilya Maro's name. She didn't flinch. "We move your assets into a trust," she said, her pen tapping the table. "Now, before he files anything." My savings, my condo, my investments, everything I'd built, they'd be untouchable. By noon, the paperwork was in motion, my signature sealing the trust like a lock Dean couldn't pick. My chest felt lighter, like I'd shed a weight I hadn't known I carried. I was one step ahead, and he didn't even know it. Dean came home that evening, his tie loosened, his smile easy, like he still held the upper hand. He poured a drink, oblivious to the shift in the air. I sat across from him, my hands folded, watching the way his fingers curled around the glass. "We need to talk," he said, setting his drink down, his tone practiced, like a lawyer delivering a closing argument. I tilted my head, calm. "Oh?" He exhaled, leaning forward, his eyes searching mine. "I think we should separate, Paisley. It's not working anymore, you have to see that." The words landed like a rehearsed script, each syllable measured. He wasn't asking, he was telling me it was over. I let the silence stretch, watching his jaw tighten. "You've been planning this, haven't you?" I said, my voice steady. A flicker crossed his face, gone before I could name it. "It's for the best," he said, dodging. "We've grown apart." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table, my gaze locked on his. "You mean you want out, but you want to make sure you don't leave empty-handed." His lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't deny it. My pulse thrummed, not with fear, but with clarity. "I already moved my assets, Dean." His posture stiffened, his breath catching, a crack in his polished facade. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice too sharp. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Exactly what it sounds like." His jaw clenched, and I saw it, the moment he realized he'd lost. Months of scheming, undone because he underestimated me. He stood, grabbing his glass, his knuckles white. "You're going to regret this," he muttered, his voice low, a promise or a bluff. I didn't care. I leaned back, tilting my head. "We'll see." The next morning, a knock at the door shattered the quiet. A man in a navy blazer handed me a thick envelope. "Paisley Thompson, you've been served," he said, his expression blank. My fingers tightened around the papers as he walked away, the weight heavier than it should have been. I sat at the kitchen table, exhaling sharply before tearing open the flap. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Dean wasn't just leaving, he wanted half of everything: the condo, the car, 50% of our shared assets, and, audaciously, spousal support. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Of course, but he didn't know the trust was already in place. I met my lawyer, Patricia, that afternoon, her office smelling of polished wood and fresh ink. She flipped through the papers, a smirk tugging at her lips. "He's got nothing," she said, tapping her nails on the desk. "You moved everything into a trust before he filed. Legally, he can't touch it. Spousal support? Not with your income history." I exhaled, my shoulders easing for the first time in days. Dean had played his hand, but I'd changed the game. He thought he'd break me. Instead, I was ready for war. Dean didn't take defeat lightly. The Chicago air turned bitter that week, mirroring the shift in our war. At 32, I'd learned to trust my instincts, but nothing prepared me for the venom he'd unleash. He'd lost his grip on my assets, but men like Dean don't slink away. They strike harder. I felt it first at work, a creeping unease that followed me through the office. Colleagues' glances lingered too long, their whispers cutting off when I entered the room. By mid-morning, my assistant Rachel hesitated at my door, her hands twisting nervously. I glanced up from my laptop, already drained. "What is it, Rachel?" She shifted, avoiding my eyes. "There's a rumor going around. I wasn't going to say anything, but—" She trailed off, swallowing hard. "Just tell me," I said, my voice sharper than intended. Rachel sighed. "People are saying you took money from your joint accounts, that you were laundering funds." The words hit like a slap, my stomach twisting with fury. "What?" I managed, my voice low. "I don't believe it," she added quickly, "but Dean's been talking to lawyers, mutual friends. It's spreading." I stared at her, the room tilting slightly. Dean wasn't just after my money anymore. He was trying to ruin me, to paint me as a criminal in Chicago's tight-knit professional circles. My hands clenched, nails biting my palms. "Thank you, Rachel," I said, forcing calm. She nodded and left, but the fire in my chest roared. Dean wanted to play dirty. Fine. I stormed to Patricia's office, slamming a stack of printed screenshots, emails, texts, social media whispers, onto her desk. "This needs to stop," I said, my voice shaking with rage. Patricia glanced at the papers, her lips curling into a dry chuckle. "He's desperate," she said, leaning back, tapping her pen. "Slandering you like this? He's opening himself up to defamation charges." I clenched my jaw. "I don't want this dragging out in court. I want him to stop." She sighed, her eyes sharp. "He's baiting you, Paisley. He wants you to react emotionally. Don't give him that." I nodded stiffly, but inside I was seething. Dean was counting on me to crack, to make a mistake. I wouldn't. That evening, I found him at La Rue, one of Chicago's swankiest restaurants, laughing over drinks with two colleagues. The sight of him, so at ease, his tie loose, his grin wide, while he dragged my name through the mud, made my blood boil. I didn't scream. I didn't cause a scene. I walked to his table, my heels clicking on the polished floor, and leaned down, my voice a whisper. "You have no idea what you've just started." His smirk faltered, just for a split second, before he masked it with a grin, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Let's see what you've got, Paisley," he said, his eyes gleaming with challenge. I straightened, holding his gaze, then turned and walked away, the weight of my warning settling like frost. I was done playing fair. The next blow came fast. My phone rang as I sipped morning coffee, the Chicago skyline gray beyond my window. Patricia's voice was tight, no preamble. "You need to come in. Dean just filed a motion for a full financial audit." I set my mug down, my hand steady despite the jolt in my chest. "On what grounds?" I asked. She exhaled. "He's claiming you mismanaged joint funds and owe him a settlement. It's nonsense, but that's not the point." I closed my eyes, bitterness curling inside me. "He's trying to drain me," I said. "Legal fees, time, stress." "Exactly," Patricia replied. "I'll be there in an hour." I hung up, my gaze fixed on the city below. Dean didn't play to win outright. He played to exhaust you, to grind you down until you broke. But I wasn't breaking. Not now, not ever. By the time I reached Patricia's office, she had Dean's motion spread across her desk, red ink slashing through his claims. "Good news," she said, looking up. "He's got no evidence. Bad news? This could drag out if the court entertains his tactics." I clenched my fists, the leather of her chair creaking under me. "What's our next move?" She smiled, sharp and satisfied. "We counterfile for dismissal and demand he pays all legal costs. If the court sees this as a stall, he's done." I nodded, a spark of hope cutting through my anger. Dean thought he could bury me in paperwork and lies. He was about to learn how wrong he was. 2 weeks later, I sat in a Chicago courtroom, the air thick with the scent of polished oak and tension. At 32, I'd faced Dean's lies, his slander, his audacity, but this was the crucible. Dean sat across the room, his suit sharp, his tie a touch too tight, his smirk barely concealed. He thought this was his moment, his motion for a financial audit, the blade to bleed me dry. I didn't flinch. Patricia, calm as a winter lake, adjusted her glasses beside me, her binder of evidence a shield. The judge's gavel loomed, and I felt the weight of every choice that led me here. Dean had underestimated me, and today he'd pay for it. Dean's lawyer stood first, his voice smooth, practiced. "Your Honor, my client believes Mrs. Thompson improperly moved assets to avoid a fair divorce settlement. We request a full forensic audit of all financial transfers in the past 6 months." The words were a calculated jab, meant to paint me as a thief. I kept my eyes forward, my hands steady, refusing to give Dean the satisfaction of a reaction. Patricia rose, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Your Honor, my client's financial moves were made before Mr. Thompson filed for divorce. There is no evidence of mismanagement or fraud." She slid her binder forward, pages marked with precision. "We request this motion be dismissed with prejudice, and that Mr. Thompson cover all legal fees, as this is clear financial harassment." The judge's expression remained unreadable, flipping through the documents. Dean watched me, waiting for me to squirm. I met his gaze, unflinching, and saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The gavel fell. "The court finds no grounds for a full financial audit," the judge said, her voice firm. "The motion is denied. Mr. Thompson will cover all associated legal fees." A sharp clap echoed, and Dean's smirk vanished, his jaw locking tight. I exhaled, a quiet victory pulsing through me. But Dean wasn't done. The next morning, Patricia called, her tone urgent. "Dean and Ilya filed a formal complaint," she said. "They're accusing you of financial fraud, claiming you falsified records for months." My grip tightened on the phone, the Chicago skyline blurring beyond my window. If this stuck, I faced not just financial ruin, but criminal charges. "The documents?" I asked, my voice steady. "Forged," Patricia said, a scoff in her tone. "But they're good. Someone worked hard to make them look real." I arrived at her office, the city's hum muted by my focus. Patricia had the documents spread out, red ink circling discrepancies. Beatrice, a friend and forensic whiz, had already reviewed them. "The timestamps?" Beatrice said, pointing to a page. "They're off. These accounts didn't exist when the transactions supposedly happened." My fear burned away, replaced by a sharp resolve. Dean and Ilya had overplayed their hand. "We're not just defending," I told Patricia, my palms flat on her desk. "We're burying them." She nodded, a glint in her eyes. "We file a motion proving the documents are fraudulent, then sue for defamation and falsifying evidence." 2 weeks later, I faced Dean in court again, the final battle. Patricia laid out our case with lethal precision. "These documents against my client were fabricated," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "We have proof that the transactions never occurred." The forensic analyst took the stand, detailing every false timestamp, every doctored number. Dean's lawyers squirmed, their whispers urgent. Then Patricia delivered the killing blow, placing a folder before the judge. "In light of these fraudulent accusations, my client is countersuing Mr. Thompson and his associate, Ilya Morrow, for defamation and falsifying legal evidence." The silence was deafening. Dean's face paled, his jaw locked. His lawyer stood, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, my client wishes to withdraw his claims." Of course he did. The judge nodded. "Motion dismissed. Mr. Thompson will cover all costs." Another gavel clap, and it was over. Outside the courthouse, Dean brushed past me, his steps heavy. "You think this is over?" he muttered, just loud enough. I let him walk a few paces, then whispered, "We're done here." He didn't turn back. The settlement came swiftly. Dean got nothing, his claims dismissed, his reputation in tatters. I'd won not just the battle, but the war. As I left Patricia's office, the Chicago wind felt cleaner, like it carried away the last of Dean's shadow. I was free, and he was the one left broken. 2 days later, I sat across from Patricia in her Chicago office, the final stack of papers between us. She slid them over, her smile warm. "It's done," she said. Dean signed the settlement. I scanned the pages, my fingers steady, the words blurring into a single truth. Dean got nothing, not a dime, not a claim, not a shred of my life. I exhaled, a quiet laugh escaping, more breath than sound. "How do you feel?" Patricia asked, leaning back. "Lighter," I said, and meant it. At 32, I'd fought for my future and won. She nodded. "You deserve that." I slipped the documents into my bag, shook her hand, and stepped into the city, the weight of months lifting with each step. That evening, my mother, Margot, insisted on a victory dinner. Her Chicago home glowed with warmth as she hugged me, her eyes brimming with relief. "It's over," she whispered. "It is," I murmured, hugging her back. Beatrice poured champagne, raising her glass with a grin. "To freedom," she said, "and to never letting a man think he can outsmart you again." I clinked my glass, laughing, the sound free and full. We ate, talked, and reminisced, the city's skyline twinkling outside. For the first time in months, I wasn't braced for the next blow. The war was over, and I'd claimed my peace. Later, I stood on my balcony, the Chicago lights stretching into the horizon, a canvas of possibility. The air was crisp, carrying the promise of spring. I wasn't the woman who'd ignored Dean's lies, who'd trusted too long. I'd lost trust, time, a version of love I thought was real. But I'd gained more. Strength, clarity, control. My phone vibrated, an unknown number flashing. I didn't hesitate. Blocked. I opened my laptop and a blank document was waiting. A new chapter, my story, ready to be written. I closed it, whispering, "This is mine now." Life tests us when we least expect it, and sometimes the deepest betrayals come from those we hold closest. But here's what I've learned. Strength isn't dodging the knife. It's rising after it cuts. At 32, I could have let Dean's betrayal break me, let fear consume me. Instead, I fought for my money, my dignity, my future. If you've been blindsided, if the ground's been ripped from under you, know this. You're not alone. Life throws its worst, but those moments forge who you are. Walking away from what no longer serves you is the greatest victory. So tell me, have you ever had to fight against the odds? Drop a 1 in the comments or share where you're watching from. If this story hit home, subscribe and hit that bell. There's more to come. Stay strong, stay smart, and never let anyone steal your power.